The stagecoach wheels had barely stopped turning when Grace Remington knew something was terribly wrong. Through the frosted window, she could see him standing on the porch of the general store, arms crossed tight against his chest, his face hard as granite. Samuel Whitmore, the man who had written her those beautiful letters promising a life of companionship and warmth in California, looked nothing like the gentle soul who had penned words of hope across 1,000 miles. The December snow fell heavy and wet around the coach, an unusual sight in San Pedro, California, where winter rarely brought more than cold rain. But this year, 1881, had proven different, as if nature itself conspired to make her arrival as unwelcoming as possible. Grace gathered her worn carpet bag and stepped down into the slushy street, her traveling dress already damp at the hem. She was 22 years old, had sold everything she owned in Philadelphia, and had spent 3 weeks traveling west with nothing but those letters and a photograph to sustain her hope. The photograph showed a handsome man with kind eyes, but the person glaring at her now seemed to be someone else entirely. "You are not what I expected," Samuel said flatly as she approached, not bothering with pleasantries or even a proper greeting. His eyes raked over her in a way that made her skin crawl, assessing her like livestock at auction. Grace felt heat rise to her cheeks despite the cold. "I am Grace Remington. We have been corresponding for 6 months, Mr. Whitmore. You invited me here." "That was before," he said, his voice carrying across the nearly empty street. A few townspeople had stopped to watch, their expressions ranging from curious to pitying. "My circumstances have changed. I require a wife who can bring something to this union besides a pretty face and empty hands." The words struck her like physical blows. "I was honest in every letter about my situation. I am alone in this world, yes, but I am hardworking and capable. You wrote that you valued character and companionship above material wealth." Samuel laughed, a bitter sound. "That was when I thought you might at least have family connections or prospects. But looking at you now, I can see you are exactly what you claim to be. Nothing. Nobody. I will not be saddled with dead weight." He turned toward the store entrance. "Find your own way back east, Miss Remington. Our arrangement is terminated." The small crowd that had gathered murmured, but no one stepped forward. Grace stood in the falling snow, her entire world crumbling around her. She had precisely $14 to her name, not nearly enough for passage back home, even if she had a home to return to. The boarding house matron in Philadelphia had already rented her room. Her position at the textile mill had been filled within days of her departure. There was nothing and no one waiting for her anywhere. "Please," she heard herself say, hating the desperation in her voice. "Mr. Whitmore, I have nowhere to go. You made a promise." He paused at the door, glanced back with something like satisfaction at her predicament, and said, "Then you should have been more valuable." The door shut behind him with finality. Grace stood trembling, though whether from cold or shock she could not say. The snow continued its relentless descent, already accumulating on her shoulders and hat. The stagecoach driver cleared his throat uncomfortably from his perch. "Miss, I am sorry about this, but we have a schedule to keep. I cannot wait." "Of course," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for bringing me this far." The coach pulled away, its wheels cutting fresh tracks through the white blanketed street, taking with it her last connection to anywhere else. Grace looked around San Pedro with new eyes. The small coastal town huddled against the unusual cold, smoke rising from chimneys, windows glowing with warm lamplight that seemed to mock her. She could see the harbor in the distance, ships at anchor, their masts like bare trees against the gray sky. Under other circumstances, she might have thought it beautiful. That was a sorry sight to witness. The voice came from her left, deep and rough, but not unkind. Grace turned to see a man sitting on the bench outside the telegraph office, a position that would have given him a clear view of her humiliation. He was tall, even seated, with broad shoulders under a heavy canvas coat. A worn Stetson hat shadowed his face, but she could see dark eyes watching her with what might have been sympathy. "Samuel Whitmore is a coward and a fool. I appreciate the sentiment, sir, but it changes nothing about my situation." Grace fought to keep her voice steady, to maintain some shred of dignity. The man stood, and she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. He was perhaps 27 or 28, with a strong jaw, dark with stubble and weathered skin that spoke of years working outdoors. There was a quiet strength about him, something solid and dependable that had been entirely absent in Samuel Whitmore. "Fletcher Bryant," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "I run the Bryant Ranch about 5 miles north of town. Been sitting here waiting for supplies that apparently are not coming today. Grace Remington." She saw no point in hiding her identity. By tomorrow, everyone in San Pedro would know the story of the mail-order bride who had been refused, though I suppose my name matters little now. Fletcher studied her for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "You are cold and you have had a shock. The hotel is just down the street. Let me at least buy you a hot meal while you figure out your next move." Pride warred with practicality. Grace was indeed freezing, and she had not eaten since dawn. More than that, something in Fletcher Bryant's straightforward manner made her trust him in a way she had never trusted Samuel Whitmore, even through all those letters. "That is very kind, but I do not wish to be a burden to a stranger." "No burden, just common decency." He gestured toward the building with the painted sign reading San Pedro Hotel and Dining Room. "Come on before we both turn into ice sculptures. This snow is something else." Grace found herself walking beside him, acutely aware of the curious glances from other townspeople. Fletcher seemed unconcerned by the attention, his long strides eating up the distance. He held the hotel door open, and warmth rushed out to greet her. The dining room was small but clean, with perhaps a dozen tables covered in cheerful checked cloth. Only 3 were occupied, and conversations died as they entered. Fletcher ignored the stares and led her to a table near the pot-bellied stove. "2 coffees and whatever you have hot for supper," he told the serving woman who approached. "Beef stew and fresh bread today," the woman said, her eyes darting between Fletcher and Grace with undisguised curiosity. "That suit you both?" "Perfectly," Fletcher said, pulling out a chair for Grace before seating himself across from her. Once they were alone, or as alone as possible with every other patron trying to eavesdrop, Grace said quietly, "You witnessed my humiliation, so you know I have very little money. I cannot repay this kindness. Did not ask you to." Fletcher removed his hat, revealing dark brown hair that needed cutting. "Look, Miss Remington, I am not going to pretend I know what you are going through. But I know what it is like to have plans fall apart, to feel like you are standing on nothing." He paused as the serving woman brought their coffee. "About 3 years back, I lost my parents and my younger sister to typhoid fever, all within a week of each other. Left me with a ranch to run alone and no real idea how to do it." "I am so sorry," Grace said softly, recognizing genuine grief even years removed. "Point is, people helped me. Neighbors, friends, even strangers who heard about my situation. If they had not, I would have lost everything. So when I see someone in trouble, I help if I can. Simple as that." The stew arrived thick and fragrant, and Grace realized she was famished. They ate in silence for a few minutes before she asked, "What kind of ranch do you run?" "Cattle mostly, some horses." It is not the biggest operation in California, but it is mine and it is paid for. That counts for something. Fletcher broke off a piece of bread. I have 3 men who work for me, good hands. We manage well enough. It sounds like a good life, Grace said, unable to keep a wistful note from her voice. It can be. Fletcher set down his spoon and looked at her directly. I am going to say something and I want you to hear me out before you answer. Can you do that? Wariness crept over her. I suppose so. I need a wife. The words were blunt, startling in their directness. Not for the reasons Samuel Whitmore thought he needed one. I do not care about dowries or connections. I need a partner, someone to help run the household, someone to build a life with. The ranch does well, but a house is not a home when you are the only one in it. He held up a hand as she started to speak. I know this is sudden. I know we just met. But you need a place to stay and a purpose, and I need someone I can trust to share my life. It seems like maybe we could help each other. Grace stared at him, her mind reeling. You cannot be serious. You do not know anything about me. I know you traveled 3,000 miles to honor a commitment to a man you had never met. I know you stood in the snow and tried to hold onto your dignity when that man treated you worse than dirt. I know you are practical enough to accept help when you need it, but proud enough not to want charity. Fletcher's dark eyes were steady on hers. That tells me plenty about your character. This is insane, Grace whispered, but even as she said it, a part of her was considering his offer. What other options did she have? Return east to what? A factory job if she could find one, a rented room, a life of lonely survival. At least here she would have purpose, security, perhaps eventually even companionship. Maybe, Fletcher agreed. But insanity and opportunity can look a lot alike. I am not asking you to love me, Miss Remington. I am asking you to give us both a chance at something better than what we have right now. You do not know me, she repeated. I could be anyone. I could be terrible at running a household. I could be dishonest or lazy or any number of awful things. Are you any of those things? No. Then that is settled. He smiled for the first time, and it transformed his serious face into something warmer, almost handsome. Look, I am not going to pressure you, but I am offering you honest work and honest respect as my wife. The ranch house has 4 bedrooms. You can have your own space until you feel comfortable. If after a few months you decide this is not the life for you, I will buy you passage to wherever you want to go, no questions asked. But I think we might both find that this arrangement works better than either of us expected. Grace wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, drawing warmth from the ceramic. Everything had happened so fast. Just hours ago, she had been full of hope and nerves about meeting Samuel Whitmore. Now that dream was ashes, but here was something else, something she had not anticipated. Fletcher Bryant was not offering her romance or pretty words. He was offering her honesty and a partnership. After the lies in Samuel's letters, perhaps that was worth more. I am a good cook, she heard herself say, and I can sew, clean, manage accounts. I ran my aunt's household for 3 years before she died. See, we are perfectly matched then because I am terrible at all of those things. Fletcher's smile widened. So, is that a yes? Grace took a deep breath, feeling as though she stood on the edge of a precipice. Behind her was nothing but cold and uncertainty. Ahead was this stranger with steady eyes and a straightforward offer. She thought of her grandmother, who had always said that sometimes the best thing you could do was take a leap of faith. Yes, she said quietly. But I want your promise that you meant what you said, about your own space, about being able to leave if this does not work. You have my word. Fletcher extended his hand across the table, and after a moment, Grace shook it. His grip was firm and warm, calloused from hard work. Then you are mine now. I will take care of you, Grace Remington. That is a promise I intend to keep. The simple declaration sent an unexpected shiver through her. Not fear exactly, but something else. Anticipation, perhaps, or the first flutter of hope. "Then I suppose you had better tell me what I am getting myself into, Mr. Bryant." "Fletcher," he corrected. "We are to be married. Might as well start with first names." He leaned back in his chair. "And what you are getting into is early mornings, a lot of hard work, beautiful land, and a stubborn man who does not always remember to wipe his boots before coming inside." Despite everything, Grace found herself almost smiling. "And what are you getting yourself into, honestly?" "I am hoping for decent meals, clean clothes, and someone to talk to in the evenings who is not a cowherd or a horse." His expression softened. "And maybe, if we are both lucky, a real partnership. Someone to weather the hard times with and celebrate the good ones." It was perhaps the most honest proposal any woman had ever received. No flowery promises, no false declarations of love. Just the truth, plain and simple. Grace discovered she appreciated that more than all of Samuel Whitmore's empty poetry. "The Reverend lives 2 streets over," Fletcher continued. "If you are willing, we could speak with him this evening. Get married tomorrow or the day after, whenever you feel ready. In the meantime, Mrs. Chen, who runs this hotel, is a respectable woman. I will pay for a room for you tonight, proper and above board." That seems very fast. Even as she said it, Grace knew she had little choice. Every day in the hotel would cost money she did not have. "It is fast," Fletcher agreed. "But given your situation, I figured sooner was better than later. Gives people less to gossip about, gets you settled. But if you need time to think it over, I understand." Grace looked down at her empty stew bowl, her mind racing through possibilities and implications. In the end, the decision was surprisingly simple. She had already made one leap of faith by coming west. What was one more? "Tomorrow," she said firmly, meeting his eyes. "Let us do it tomorrow. I see no point in prolonging the uncertainty." Something like relief crossed Fletcher's face. "Tomorrow, then. I will make the arrangements with Reverend Thompson." He stood and placed several coins on the table, more than enough to cover their meal. "Let me get you settled with a room. I need to collect my supplies if they have finally arrived, and then I will head back to the ranch. I will return in the morning with the wagon to bring you home." Home. The word echoed strangely in Grace's mind as she followed Fletcher to the hotel's front desk. She had not had a true home since her aunt died 2 years ago. Could the Bryant Ranch become that? Could this serious, straightforward man become not just a husband in name but a true partner, Mrs. Chen? A tiny woman with sharp eyes and an efficient manner looked between them with obvious interest. "Room for the lady?" she asked Fletcher in accented English. "Yes, madam." "Your best available for tonight." Fletcher counted out money. "Miss Remington will be staying just the one night. We are to be married tomorrow." Mrs. Chen's eyebrows rose, but she was too professional to comment directly. "Congratulations. I have a nice room on the 2nd floor, very clean, very quiet." She handed Grace a key. "Number 7. I bring hot water for washing in 1 hour." "Thank you," Grace said, accepting the key with numb fingers. Fletcher turned to her, his expression gentle. "I know this is all happening very fast. If you change your mind overnight, no one will judge you for it." "Well, they might, but not me. You understand?" "I do, but I will not change my mind." Grace surprised herself with how certain she sounded. "I will see you in the morning, Fletcher." He nodded, settled his hat back on his head, and walked out into the snow. Through the window, Grace watched him stride down the street, his shoulders broad against the white backdrop. Then she climbed the stairs to room 7, unlocked the door, and stepped into the small, neat space that would be her last night as an unmarried woman. Grace sat on the edge of the narrow bed, and finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of the day. She had been rejected, humiliated, then proposed to by a stranger, all in the span of a few hours. She should be terrified. Instead, she felt a strange calm settling over her. Fletcher Bryant might be a stranger, but he had already shown himself to be a man of integrity. That was more than she could say for Samuel Whitmore. The hot water arrived as promised, and Grace washed away the grime of travel. She brushed out her long brown hair and examined her reflection in the small mirror over the washstand. She was not a great beauty, but neither was she plain. Gray eyes, a straight nose, a determined chin. Her face had thinned over the last few years of hardship, but she was still herself. Still Grace Remington, at least for one more night. Tomorrow she would become Grace Bryant. The thought was both terrifying and oddly thrilling. She crawled under the blankets as darkness fell and snow continued to pile up outside the window. Somewhere out there, 5 miles north, was the ranch that would be her new home. Somewhere out there was the man who would be her husband. Sleep came eventually, and with it dreams of wide skies and open land, of strong hands and steady eyes, of a life she had not planned but might somehow build into something good. Morning arrived cold and bright. The snow had stopped overnight, leaving San Pedro blanketed in white. Grace dressed in her best dress, a deep blue wool that brought out her eyes and did her hair in a simple but elegant style. She had so few possessions to pack that her carpet bag was ready in minutes. Then she sat by the window and waited, watching the town wake up below her. Fletcher arrived exactly when he said he would, driving a sturdy wagon pulled by 2 handsome bay horses. Grace saw him pull up, secure the team, and stride into the hotel with the confidence of a man who knew exactly what he wanted. Her heart beat faster as footsteps sounded in the hallway, then a knock at her door. "It is Fletcher." Grace opened the door to find him standing there in clean clothes, his hair still damp from washing, his jaw freshly shaved. He looked younger without the stubble, and she caught a glimpse of what he must have looked like before loss and responsibility had weathered him. "Good morning," she said. "I am ready." He picked up her carpet bag. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I expected." "You?" "About the same." "I kept thinking I had dreamed the whole thing, to be honest." He offered her a crooked smile. "Seemed too good to be true that I would meet someone like you just when I needed to." They walked downstairs together, and Grace settled her account with Mrs. Chen, who wished them well with genuine warmth. Out on the street, several townspeople watched with curiosity as Fletcher helped Grace into the wagon. She recognized the serving woman from the dining room and a man who must have been the general store owner. "No sign of Samuel Whitmore, thank goodness." "Let me guess," Grace said as Fletcher climbed up beside her. "The whole town is talking." "Probably. San Pedro is not that big. Any news spreads fast." He clicked to the horses and they started moving. "But let them talk. By next week, something else will be more interesting." "Does it bother you that people might think this is strange?" Fletcher considered this as they turned onto a street that led inland, away from the harbor. "I learned something when my family died. People will think what they want to think, and you cannot control that. All you can control is your own actions and whether you can look yourself in the mirror at night. I know my intentions are good, and I believe yours are too. That is all that matters." It was a philosophy Grace found herself admiring. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the wagon wheels crunching through snow. Reverend Thompson lived in a small house beside a whitewashed church, and he answered their knock with a surprised but welcoming expression. "Fletcher Bryant. What brings you into town in this weather?" The Reverend was perhaps 60, with a ring of white hair around his balding head and a kind face. "Morning, Reverend. This is Miss Grace Remington. We would like you to marry us." If Reverend Thompson found this request unusual, he hid it well. "Is that so? Well, come in out of the cold. Let us talk." They spent the next hour in the Reverend's cozy front room explaining the situation. Grace appreciated that Fletcher did not try to hide the circumstances of their meeting. He was honest about her being a refused mail-order bride, honest about his own need for a wife to help run the ranch. Reverend Thompson listened carefully, asked thoughtful questions about their expectations and understanding of marriage, and seemed satisfied that neither was entering into this lightly. "Marriage is a serious commitment," the Reverend said finally. "But I have seen unions begin in stranger ways that turned into loving partnerships. If you are both certain this is what you want, I will perform the ceremony." "We are certain," Fletcher said, and Grace nodded her agreement. "This afternoon, then, say 3 o'clock. That will give me time to arrange for witnesses. You will need 2. 3 o'clock is perfect," Fletcher agreed. They left the Reverend's house and Fletcher drove them to a small but well-kept general store. "You will need a few things before we head to the ranch," he said. "A proper coat for winter, some work dresses, whatever else you think you might need. Consider it a wedding gift." Grace wanted to protest, but practicality won out. Her traveling dress and the 2 changes of clothes in her bag would not last long doing ranch work. Inside the store, she selected carefully, aware of costs even though Fletcher insisted she not worry about it. A warm wool coat, 2 sturdy calico dresses, a split riding skirt, undergarments, a nightgown, sturdy boots. The storekeeper, a man named Miller, wrapped everything in brown paper and tied it with string. "Heard you 2 were getting married," Miller said conversationally. "Congratulations. Your folks were good people, Fletcher. Your ma used to buy her flour here every month, regular as clockwork." "Thank you, sir. I appreciate that." Fletcher loaded the packages into the wagon. "We will be back in town next week probably, once this snow clears." Their next stop was the hotel dining room for lunch. Grace found she was nervous now that the ceremony was only hours away. This was really happening. She was really going to marry a man she had met just yesterday. "Having second thoughts?" Fletcher asked quietly as they ate. "No, just first thoughts, I suppose. Actually processing what we are doing. I have been doing the same thing all morning." He set down his fork. "Grace, I want you to know something. I am not going to pretend this is a conventional marriage, but I do intend to honor my vows. I will be faithful to you, I will provide for you, and I will do my best to make you happy. That is what I can promise." "And I will do the same," Grace said softly. "I will work hard, I will be honest with you, and I will try to make our house a home. That is what I can promise." They shook hands across the table, sealing their private vows before the public ones. Grace felt something shift inside her, a settling of purpose. This might not be the romantic love story she had once imagined for herself, but it was real and honest. That counted for something. At 3 o'clock, they stood in the small church with Reverend Thompson, Mrs. Chen, and Mr. Miller as witnesses. The late afternoon sun streamed through the simple windows, painting everything in gold. Grace wore her blue dress and held a small bouquet of dried flowers that Mrs. Chen had pressed into her hands. Fletcher stood beside her in clean denims and a pressed shirt, his hat in his hands. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. Reverend Thompson spoke about partnership and mutual respect, about building a life together through both hardship and joy. When it came time for the vows, Fletcher's voice was steady and sure. Grace's hands trembled slightly as he slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, but her voice did not waver. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Thompson said with a smile. "Fletcher, you may kiss your bride." Fletcher hesitated for just a moment, then leaned down and brushed his lips gently against Grace's. It was brief and chaste, but Grace felt warmth spread through her at the contact. When they drew apart, his eyes held a question and perhaps a promise. They signed the marriage certificate, thanked the reverend and the witnesses, and then they were outside in the cold December air, married. Grace looked down at the ring on her finger, solid and real. Mrs. Grace Bryant, it would take some getting used to. Ready to see your new home? Fletcher asked, offering his hand to help her into the wagon. Yes, Grace said and meant it. The road north led them out of San Pedro and into rolling hills dusted with snow. The landscape was beautiful in a stark way, quite different from the green hills of Pennsylvania. Fletcher pointed out landmarks as they traveled. A creek that ran year-round, the property line that marked the beginning of Bryant land, the rocky outcropping where he had once found an arrowhead. The ranch house was built by my grandfather, Fletcher explained as they drove. He came west in the early 50s, bought the land, and built everything from scratch. My father improved it, added the barn and the bunkhouse. It is solid construction, meant to last. Do you have any other family? Anyone who should know about our marriage? My father had a brother who lives in Sacramento. We exchange letters a few times a year, but we are not close. My mother was an only child, so no, it is just me now, just us, he corrected himself. What about you? My parents died when I was young. My aunt raised me, but she died 2 years ago. I have no siblings, no cousins that I know of. I suppose we are both starting fresh. Fletcher reached over and squeezed her hand briefly. Then we will make our own family. It does not have to be blood to matter. The ranch came into view as they crested a hill, and Grace caught her breath. The house was larger than she had expected, a 2-story structure of wood and stone with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Smoke rose from the chimney. Nearby stood a substantial barn painted red, a smaller bunkhouse, and several outbuildings. Fences marked off paddocks and pastures where cattle grazed, dark shapes against the white snow. It is beautiful, Grace said honestly. It is home. Fletcher's voice held pride and affection. Come on, let me introduce you to the Hands. They know I was going into town to get married, though I am sure they think I am crazy. 3 men emerged from the barn as the wagon pulled into the yard. Fletcher made introductions. Jim Holloway, the oldest at perhaps 45, with gray threading through his hair and a weathered face. Tom Parker, somewhere in his 30s, stocky and strong, and young Danny Reid, barely 20, with a quick smile and curious eyes. Madam, Jim said, touching his hat brim. Welcome to the Bryant Ranch. Thank you, Grace said warmly. I hope we will work well together. Oh, we are just glad Fletcher will have someone to cook decent meals, Tom said with a grin. No offense, boss, but your biscuits could break teeth. Everyone laughed, breaking the slight awkwardness. Fletcher helped Grace down from the wagon and grabbed her packages and carpet bag. Let me show you the house. Men, we will see you at supper. Say 7 o'clock. We will be there, Jim promised. Inside, the ranch house was clean but clearly the domain of men living alone. The furniture was sturdy and well made but arranged without much thought to comfort or appearance. The kitchen was large and well equipped, but had the look of a space that was used purely for function. Grace could already see dozens of ways to make it more welcoming. Fletcher watched her look around. I know it needs a woman's touch. I did my best, but this was never my area of expertise. It has good bones, Grace said, running her hand along the kitchen table. It just needs some attention and care. He showed her through the rest of the house. The downstairs held the kitchen, a large front room with a fireplace, a study that was clearly Fletcher's domain with its desk and account books, and a small washroom. Upstairs were 4 bedrooms, just as he had promised. The largest had clearly been his parents' room and was now Fletcher's. The others were furnished but unused, waiting. "This one has the best light," Fletcher said, opening the door to a corner room with windows on 2 walls. "I thought maybe you would like it. I had Jim bring in fresh linens this morning and light the stove so it would be warm." Grace stepped into the room and felt tears prick her eyes. It was a lovely space, with a 4-poster bed covered in a colorful quilt, a wardrobe, a washstand with a pretty basin and pitcher, even a small desk by the window. Someone had placed a vase of dried lavender on the nightstand. "Thank you," she said quietly. "This is more than I expected. You are my wife now. I want you to be comfortable." Fletcher set her bag and packages on the bed. "I will leave you to settle in. Take your time, look around, make yourself at home. I need to check on some things in the barn, but I will be back in an hour or so to help with supper." After he left, Grace sat on the bed and looked around her new room, her new home, her new life. It was overwhelming when she let herself think about it too much, so instead she focused on the practical. She unpacked her few belongings, hanging her dresses in the wardrobe, arranging her hairbrush and pins on the washstand. She changed out of her good dress into one of the new calico ones, then explored the upstairs more thoroughly. The room next to hers was smaller, perhaps meant for a child someday. That thought made her blush. She and Fletcher had not discussed the more intimate aspects of marriage, though she knew what was expected. But he had promised her time, her own space. She would trust him to keep that promise. Downstairs, Grace investigated the kitchen properly. The pantry was well stocked with basics: flour, sugar, coffee, beans, dried meat, canned vegetables. She found a good supply of potatoes and onions in a root cellar accessed through a door in the kitchen floor. There was a cold box on the back porch with fresh milk and butter. She could work with this. By the time Fletcher returned, Grace had beef frying in a large skillet, potatoes boiling on the stove, and biscuit dough rising near the fire. She had found an apron hanging on a hook and tied it over her dress, feeling more like herself than she had in days. "Something smells good," Fletcher said from the doorway, stomping snow from his boots. "Nothing fancy, but it should be filling. I thought I would save anything complicated until I know everyone's preferences." Grace checked the biscuits. "Can you set the table?" "Plates are in that cupboard, I think." They worked together in the kitchen, developing an easy rhythm. Fletcher set out plates and utensils while Grace finished cooking. When everything was ready, he went to ring the dinner bell, and within minutes, the 3 ranch hands appeared, cleaned up and clearly hungry. Supper was a lively affair. The men were respectful but curious, asking Grace polite questions about her journey west and her impressions of California. She asked them about the ranch, about their work, about San Pedro. Tom told a funny story about a runaway steer. Danny blushed when Grace complimented his table manners. Jim was quieter but nodded approvingly when he tasted the biscuits. "Madam, these are the best biscuits I have had in years," he said solemnly. "I think you are going to work out just fine here." After the meal, the hands returned to the bunkhouse, and Grace insisted on cleaning up despite Fletcher's offer to help. "You have your own work to do," she said. "I need to learn where everything belongs anyway." She washed dishes in the large sink, dried them, and put them away. She wiped down the table and swept the floor. It felt good to have purpose, to be useful. When she finished, she found Fletcher in the study, working on account books by lamplight. "Do not stay up too late," she said from the doorway. "Tomorrow is another working day." He looked up with a smile. "Yes, madam, I will be up soon." "Grace," he hesitated, "thank you for all of this, for taking a chance on me in this place." "Thank you for offering me that chance," she replied softly. "Good night, Fletcher." Good night. In her room, Grace changed into her new nightgown and brushed out her hair. Through the wall, she could hear Fletcher moving around in his own room, the creak of floorboards and the sound of boots being removed. It was strange and intimate to hear these small domestic sounds, to know he was just on the other side of that wall. She climbed into bed and blew out the lamp. The darkness was complete in a way it never was in the city, and the silence was profound. But it was not frightening. Instead, Grace felt a sense of peace settling over her. She had made it. Against all odds, she had found a place to belong. In the days that followed, Grace threw herself into making the ranch house a proper home. She cleaned thoroughly, rearranged furniture for better flow, hung curtains she sewed from fabric Fletcher brought back from town. She learned the rhythm of ranch life: breakfast before dawn, a substantial midday meal, supper after the day's work was done. She baked bread, canned vegetables, mended clothes, and slowly transformed the house from a place men slept into a welcoming home. Fletcher was a dream to work with. He was respectful of her space, never pushing or presuming, but also warm and increasingly comfortable in her presence. They developed a habit of having coffee together after supper, sitting in the front room and talking about their days. Grace learned about his childhood, his parents, his dreams for the ranch. She shared stories of her own past, the happy memories of her parents and the harder years after their deaths. "I always felt like I was waiting for my real life to start," she confessed one evening about 2 weeks after their wedding. "Like everything was temporary until I figured out where I belonged." "Do you feel like that now?" Fletcher asked. Grace considered this carefully. "No. For the first time in years, I feel like I am building something that will last. That matters." Fletcher smiled, that warm expression that transformed his face. "I feel the same way. This place was just a business before, something to maintain. Now it is starting to feel like a home again." The weather warmed as December progressed, the unusual snow melting away to reveal brown grass and clear skies. Grace learned to ride, with patient instruction from Fletcher. He taught her to handle the gentler horses, to navigate the ranch property, to appreciate the stark beauty of the California landscape. She proved surprisingly adept, and soon she was riding out with him in the afternoons, checking on the herd and the fences. "You are a natural," Fletcher said one day as they sat on a hillside overlooking the ranch. The Pacific Ocean was a distant blue line on the horizon. "Most city women take months to feel comfortable on a horse." "I like it," Grace admitted. "I like seeing the land, understanding how everything works. It makes me feel connected to this place." Fletcher looked at her with something in his eyes that made her heart skip. "I am glad you are here, Grace. I cannot imagine this place without you now." "Neither can I," she said softly, and realized it was completely true. As Christmas approached, Grace threw herself into preparations. She baked pies and cookies, made decorations from pine boughs and berries, wrapped small gifts she had secretly purchased during a trip to town. On Christmas Eve, she invited the ranch hands to join them for a special supper, and the house filled with laughter and warmth. After the men had left and they were cleaning up together, Fletcher said, "I have something for you." He pulled a small wrapped package from his pocket. Grace opened it to find a beautiful silver locket on a delicate chain. Inside were 2 tiny photographs, one of Fletcher, one of herself from the photograph she had sent to Samuel Whitmore and later shown to Fletcher. "This is beautiful," she whispered, "but I did not think we were exchanging gifts. I wanted you to have something special, something that showed you matter to me." Fletcher took the locket and carefully fastened it around her neck. His fingers brushed her skin, and Grace shivered at the contact. "I have something for you too, then." She retrieved a wrapped package from behind the bread box. "I made it. I hope you like it." Fletcher unwrapped a beautiful shirt, perfectly tailored to his measurements in soft gray wool. "Grace, this is fine work. Try it on," she urged. He pulled off his current shirt unselfconsciously, and Grace caught her breath at the sight of his bare chest and shoulders, muscled from years of hard work. He slipped into the new shirt and buttoned it, and it fit perfectly. "How did you know my measurements?" "I am very observant," Grace said, her cheeks warm. "And I might have borrowed one of your shirts one day when you were out working." Fletcher laughed and pulled her into a hug, the first real embrace they had shared since their wedding day kiss. Grace melted into it, breathing in the scent of him, soap and leather and something uniquely Fletcher. When they pulled apart, his hands lingered on her shoulders. "Grace," he said quietly, "I know we agreed to take things slow, to give you time to adjust. But I need you to know that my feelings for you have grown beyond what I expected. You are not just convenient or helpful. You are becoming essential to me." Grace's heart raced. "I feel the same way. I did not expect this, but I think I am falling in love with you, Fletcher Bryant." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumb stroking her cheek. "May I kiss you properly, as a husband kisses his wife?" "Yes," she breathed. This kiss was nothing like the chaste peck at their wedding. It was deep and searching, full of promise and desire. Grace's hands came up to grip his shoulders as she kissed him back, pouring all her growing feelings into the contact. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Fletcher rested his forehead against hers. "I want you to know you are still welcome to your own room, to your own time." "I meant that promise." "I know you did, but I think maybe I am ready for this to be a real marriage in every way." Grace's voice was shy but certain. "If you want that too, I want that very much." Fletcher kissed her again, then took her hand. "Come with me." He led her upstairs, not to her room but to his. The room was neat and masculine, with a large bed covered in a heavy quilt. Fletcher lit the lamp on the nightstand, keeping the light low and warm. Then he turned to Grace, his expression tender. "We go at your pace," he said. "You say stop and we stop. You understand?" Grace nodded, touched by his consideration. "I understand, but I do not want to stop." They came together slowly, learning each other, taking time to build trust and pleasure. Fletcher was patient and gentle, attuned to Grace's responses, making sure she felt safe and cherished. When they finally joined together, Grace felt a completeness she had never experienced before. This was right. This was home. Afterward, they lay tangled together under the quilts, Grace's head on Fletcher's chest, his arms wrapped around her. "I love you," he murmured into her hair. "I know it is fast, but I cannot help it. I love you, Grace." "I love you too," she whispered back, tracing patterns on his skin. "I did not think this was possible. I thought love was something that would pass me by, but here you are." "Here we are," he corrected and kissed the top of her head. They slept wrapped in each other's arms, and when morning came, Grace woke in Fletcher's bed feeling happier than she had ever felt before. Her husband, because that was what he truly was now, was still asleep beside her. She studied his face in the early light, the strong features softened in sleep, the dark lashes against his cheeks, the full lips that had kissed her so thoroughly the night before. As if sensing her gaze, Fletcher's eyes opened. He smiled slowly. "Good morning, wife." "Good morning, husband." Grace leaned in to kiss him, and one thing led to another until they were making love again in the soft dawn light. Eventually, they had to rise and face the day. The ranch did not stop just because they had finally become a proper married couple. Over breakfast, Fletcher kept catching her eye and smiling, and Grace found herself blushing and smiling back. When Jim, Tom, and Danny arrived for the morning meal, the three ranch hands exchanged knowing looks but were polite enough not to comment on the obvious change in their employer's demeanor. The winter passed in a blur of happiness. Grace had never imagined domestic life could be so fulfilling. She loved running the household, loved riding out with Fletcher to check the herd, loved the quiet evenings by the fire and the passionate nights in their shared bed. Fletcher was everything she could have wanted in a husband. Strong but gentle, serious but with a dry sense of humor, hardworking but always making time for her. In February, Grace realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another week to be sure, then told Fletcher over supper one evening. "I think I am with child," she said quietly, watching his face. Fletcher's eyes went wide, then filled with joy. "Truly, I am fairly certain, yes. It is early yet, but all the signs are there." He came around the table and pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "A baby, our baby. Grace, this is wonderful. Are you happy?" she asked, even though she could feel the answer in the way he held her. "Happier than I have any right to be. You have given me everything I did not know I needed." He pulled back to look at her. "We will need to be careful. I will not have you overworking yourself." "I am pregnant, not fragile," Grace said with a laugh, "but I promise to be sensible." She wrote to the doctor in San Pedro, who confirmed her pregnancy during a visit to the ranch in March. He declared her healthy and strong, predicted a fall birth, and left instructions for her care. Fletcher became slightly overprotective, much to Grace's amused exasperation, but she loved him for it. As spring turned to summer, Grace's belly swelled with their growing child. She continued to run the household, though she accepted more help from Fletcher and the hands. They converted the small bedroom next to theirs into a nursery, painting it yellow and building a beautiful cradle from oak wood. Grace sewed tiny clothes and blankets, marveling at how small they were. "You hope for a boy or a girl?" Fletcher asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, his hand resting on her rounded belly. "I just hope for healthy," Grace said honestly. "Though a son would be nice, to help you run the ranch someday." "I would love a daughter who looks like you," Fletcher countered. "Smart and strong and beautiful." The baby kicked hard against his palm and they both laughed. "I think this one has opinions already," Grace said. In September, as the first hints of autumn touched the air, Grace's pains began. Fletcher sent Danny racing into San Pedro for the doctor and the midwife while he stayed with Grace, holding her hand and wiping her forehead with a cool cloth. The hours that followed were long and difficult, but Fletcher never left her side. "I am right here," he kept saying. "You are so strong. You can do this." And she did. As dawn broke over the ranch, Grace gave birth to a healthy baby boy with a lusty cry and a thick head of dark hair. The doctor placed him in her arms, and Grace looked down at her son with overwhelming love. "He is perfect," she whispered. Fletcher sat beside her on the bed, one arm around her shoulders, staring at the baby with wonder. "Our son. Grace, look at what we made." They named him Thomas Fletcher Bryant, Thomas for Grace's father and Fletcher for the man who had saved her that snowy December day. Tommy, as they called him, was an easy baby, healthy and happy. He had his father's dark eyes and his mother's smile, and both parents were completely besotted with him. The ranch hands treated Tommy like a beloved nephew, and even gruff Jim could be found making silly faces to earn a baby's smile. Danny proved to have a gift for entertaining the baby, much to everyone's amusement. Tom carved beautiful wooden toys in his spare time. Grace had never been happier. Her days were full of purpose and love, caring for her son and her home, supporting Fletcher in his work. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts. Fletcher had always been a good rancher, but Grace had a head for business and helped him expand their operations carefully and profitably. When Tommy was 6 months old, Grace discovered she was pregnant again. This time it felt different, and she told Fletcher she thought they might be having a daughter. "How can you tell?" he asked, intrigued. Intuition. And the fact that I crave completely different foods this time. Their daughter arrived the following summer in the heat of July. The labor was faster than with Tommy, and soon Fletcher was holding a tiny girl with his wife's gray eyes and delicate features. They named her Emily Rose Bryant, after Fletcher's mother. With 2 young children, the ranch house was filled with noise and chaos and love. Grace sometimes thought back to that cold December day when Samuel Whitmore had refused her, leaving her standing alone in the snow. If he had not rejected her, she never would have met Fletcher. She never would have found this life, this love, this family. "What are you thinking about?" Fletcher asked one evening. They were on the porch, watching Tommy chase fireflies in the yard while baby Emily slept in Grace's arms. "About how everything happens for a reason," Grace said. "About how the worst day of my life led to all the best days." Fletcher pulled her close, careful not to wake the baby. "I think about that too. About how I almost missed you because I waited so long to look for a wife. About how lucky I am that you said yes to a stranger with nothing to offer but honesty and hard work." "You offered me everything that mattered," Grace corrected. "Safety, respect, partnership. The love came as a bonus, the best bonus imaginable." Fletcher kissed her temple. "I love you, Grace Bryant, more with every passing day. And I love you forever and always." Tommy ran up to them, breathless and happy. "Papa, Mama, look how many I caught." He held up a jar with 3 fireflies glowing inside. "That is excellent, son," Fletcher said proudly. "But remember, we let them go before bedtime. They need to go home to their families." "I know, Papa." Tommy sat on the porch step, content to watch his catches for a while longer. Years passed in happiness. Tommy grew into a strong, capable boy who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Emily was bright and curious, always asking questions and exploring. 2 more children followed. Another son named Henry, and finally a daughter they called Sarah. The ranch house that had once been so quiet and empty was now filled with life and laughter. Fletcher and Grace grew older together, their love deepening with each year. They worked side by side, raising their children, building their legacy. The Bryant Ranch became known throughout California as one of the most successful and well-run operations in the region. But more than that, it was known as a happy place, where the family clearly loved each other and treated their workers like family too. Jim, Tom, and Danny all stayed on through the years. Jim eventually retired to a small house on ranch property, where he lived contentedly, always welcome at the family table. Tom married a widow from town and brought his new family to the ranch. Danny married Jim's niece, and they too built their life connected to the Bryant Ranch. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Fletcher took Grace back to San Pedro. They stayed at the hotel where they had first shared a meal, dined in the same restaurant, walked past the general store where Samuel Whitmore had rejected her. "You ever wonder what happened to him?" Fletcher asked. "Not really," Grace said honestly. "I heard he eventually married for money, some merchant's daughter. I hope he is happy, but mostly I am just grateful he set me free to find you." They stood on the dock watching the sun set over the Pacific, Fletcher's arms around Grace from behind. "Best decision I ever made," he murmured. "Seeing you standing there in the snow and thinking then you are mine. You did not just think it, you said it." Grace turned in his arms to face him. "You said then you are mine now, and you meant it." "I did mean it. I still mean it. You are mine, and I am yours, until the end of our days." They kissed there on the dock, the same deep, loving kiss they had shared on their wedding night and countless times since. Around them, the world continued on, but in that moment, they were young again, finding each other for the first time, taking a leap of faith that had paid off beyond their wildest dreams. When they returned to the ranch, their 4 children ran out to greet them, and Grace's heart overflowed with joy. This life, this family, this love, it was everything she had never dared to hope for. And it had all started with a rejection in the snow and a cowboy brave enough to say, "Then you are mine." The years continued to be kind to them. Grace and Fletcher watched their children grow into fine adults. Tommy took over more and more of the ranch operations, proving himself a worthy successor to his father. Emily studied to become a teacher and opened a small school in San Pedro, providing education to children who might otherwise have gone without. Henry became a veterinarian, using his skills to help not just the Bryant Ranch but ranchers throughout the region. Sarah, the youngest, inherited her mother's business sense and her father's love of the land, and partnered with Tommy to expand the ranch's breeding program. All 4 children married well, chose partners who loved them genuinely, and started families of their own. Fletcher and Grace became grandparents many times over, their home filled with the sound of grandchildren's laughter during holidays and celebrations. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Fletcher organized a large celebration. The ranch house and yard overflowed with family, friends, neighbors, and workers, past and present. Reverend Thompson, now quite elderly, gave a blessing. Mrs. Chen, who had become a dear friend to Grace over the years, brought special dishes from her Chinese heritage. Even old Mr. Miller from the general store attended, bringing a gift of fine fabric for Grace. As the party wound down and the sun began to set, Fletcher stood and tapped his glass for attention. "I want to say something," he announced, waiting until everyone quieted. 25 years ago, I met this woman under the worst circumstances imaginable. She had been rejected, humiliated, left alone in the snow with nowhere to go. I saw her standing there, and something in me knew she was special, knew I could not let her walk away. Grace felt tears prick her eyes as Fletcher continued. I told her that day that she was mine. It was presumptuous and probably a little crazy, but it was true. From that moment, she was mine and I was hers. Everything good in my life has come from that decision to speak up, to take a chance on a stranger who turned out to be my perfect match. He crossed to where Grace sat and took her hands, pulling her to her feet. Grace Bryant, you are still the best thing that ever happened to me. You made this house a home. You gave me 4 incredible children. You built a life with me that I treasure every single day. I love you more now than I did on our wedding day, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. Thank you for saying yes to a cowboy with more hope than sense. Grace was crying openly now. Thank you for seeing me when I needed to be seen. Thank you for offering me not just rescue but partnership. Thank you for loving me so well for so long. She stood on her toes to kiss him while their family and friends applauded. That night, after everyone had left or bedded down for the night, Fletcher and Grace sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. The stars were brilliant overhead, the air warm and sweet with the scent of summer flowers Grace had planted years ago. "Do you remember that first night?" Grace asked softly. "When we sat in the hotel dining room and you proposed?" "I remember thinking you were the bravest person I had ever met," Fletcher replied. "To travel so far alone, to hold yourself together when everything fell apart, to trust a complete stranger, I was in awe of you." "I was terrified," Grace admitted, "but there was something about you that made me feel safe, like you meant what you said and your word was worth something." "It was. It is. Everything I promised you that day I have tried to deliver. You have delivered so much more." Grace rested her head on his shoulder. "You gave me a family, Fletcher, not just children, though I treasure them, but a real family, the kind I never had growing up. You, me, the kids, the grandkids, even Jim and Tom and Danny and their families. We are all connected, all part of something bigger than ourselves. Fletcher wrapped his arm around her. That is your doing as much as mine. You made this place welcoming. You taught our children to value people and relationships, not just success and money. You built the community I just provided the land for. They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands, watching the night. After a while, Grace said, "If you could go back, knowing everything you know now, would you do it all the same?" "Without hesitation," Fletcher said firmly. "Though I might have kissed you sooner," Grace laughed. "We did fine. We had a whole lifetime to learn how to love each other properly. And we are not done yet. I plan on loving you for at least another 25 years, if not longer." That sounds perfect. More years passed, measured in grandchildren's birthdays and ranch milestones and quiet moments of contentment. Fletcher's hair went completely silver, and Grace's brown hair showed threads of gray. Their hands grew gnarled from years of work, but they still fit together perfectly when they walked side by side. Tommy and Sarah ran the ranch now, with Henry providing veterinary care and Emily contributing through her work educating the next generation. Fletcher and Grace spent more time on the porch these days, offering advice when asked, but mostly content to watch their legacy grow and flourish. On a warm afternoon in late autumn, Grace was in her garden, harvesting the last of the vegetables before the first frost. Fletcher came out to help her, moving a bit slower than he once had but still strong and capable. They worked together in companionable silence, filling baskets with squash and pumpkins. "I was thinking," Grace said, straightening up to ease her back, "about writing down our story, for the grandchildren and great-grandchildren, so they know how this all started." "That is a good idea," Fletcher agreed. "Though I am not much of a writer, you should do it. I will need your help, your perspective. It is our story, after all, not just mine." "Fair enough. We can work on it this winter when the weather keeps us inside more." They did just that. Through the winter months, Fletcher and Grace sat together by the fire and wrote down their story. Grace did most of the actual writing, but Fletcher contributed memories and details, helping her capture the fullness of their life together. They laughed over remembered moments, grew misty-eyed over the harder times they had weathered together, and marveled at how a chance meeting in the snow had led to all of this. "You think the children will appreciate it?" Grace asked one evening, reading over what they had written. "I think they will treasure it," Fletcher said, "because it is not just our story, it is their story too, the foundation everything else is built on." The manuscript was finished in early spring. Grace had it bound in leather with their names embossed on the cover, the story of Fletcher and Grace Bryant. They presented it to the family at Easter dinner, and there was not a dry eye as the older children took turns reading passages aloud. "You two are amazing," Emily said, wiping her eyes. "To think this all started because some fool rejected Mama. His loss was definitely Papa's gain." "Our gain too," Tommy added. "You built something real here, something that will last long after we are all gone." "That was the idea," Fletcher said gruffly, moved by his children's reactions. To build something that mattered, to create a legacy of love and hard work and family. That summer, Fletcher's health began to decline. Nothing dramatic, just a gradual slowing down, a weariness that rest did not cure. The doctor diagnosed a weak heart and recommended Fletcher take things easy. He was 73 years old and had worked hard every day of his life. His body was simply wearing out. Grace was fiercely protective, making sure Fletcher did not overexert himself, insisting on afternoon rests, cooking special meals to keep his strength up. Fletcher bore her fussing with good humor, knowing it came from love. "I am not ready to leave you," he told her one night as they lay in bed, her head on his chest, listening to the unsteady beat of his heart. Then do not, Grace said fiercely. Stay with me. We have more years ahead of us. I will do my best, he stroked her hair. But Grace, if something happens, I need you to know something. My only regret is that we did not have more time. Everything else, every moment we had was perfect. You made my life perfect. Stop talking like that, Grace said, tears flowing. You are not going anywhere. I will not allow it. Fletcher managed to laugh. Still giving orders. That is my Grace. He rallied for a while, enjoying the summer and spending time with his grandchildren. But in early October, he took a turn for the worse. The family gathered, knowing the end was near. Fletcher was moved to the big bed in the master bedroom, propped up with pillows so he could look out the window at the ranch he loved. Grace barely left his side, holding his hand, telling him stories, reminding him of all their best moments. The children and grandchildren took turns visiting, saying their goodbyes, telling Fletcher how much he meant to them. On a golden afternoon when the light slanted through the windows, painting everything amber and warm, Fletcher squeezed Grace's hand. "Come here," he whispered, his voice weak. Grace leaned close and Fletcher reached up to touch her face. "Best decision I ever made," he said clearly, "seeing you in that snow and knowing you were meant to be mine." "I was always meant to be yours," Grace said through her tears. "From the beginning of time, I was meant to be yours. And I was meant to be yours." Fletcher smiled, that warm, transforming smile she had fallen in love with so many years ago. "I love you, Grace, always and forever." "I love you too, always and forever." Fletcher's eyes closed and his breathing slowed. Surrounded by his family, holding the hand of the woman he loved, Fletcher Bryant passed peacefully from this world to the next. Grace sat with him for a long time afterward, not ready to let go. The children gathered around, offering comfort, but understanding that their mother needed these final private moments with their father. Finally, Grace leaned forward and kissed Fletcher's forehead one last time. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for giving me the most beautiful life imaginable. I will carry you in my heart until we meet again." The funeral was large, attended by everyone whose lives Fletcher had touched. He was buried on a hill overlooking the ranch, under an old oak tree where he had proposed they build the family cemetery years before. The headstone was simple. Fletcher James Bryant, beloved husband, father, grandfather, a man who kept his promises. Grace mourned deeply but not hopelessly. She had loved Fletcher for 33 years, and that love did not end just because he was gone. She felt him with her in the house, in the land, in their children's faces. She continued to live at the ranch, surrounded by family, finding purpose in her grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She lived another 12 years, active and engaged until nearly the end. She saw Tommy's youngest grandson born, making her a great-great-grandmother. She celebrated her 80th birthday surrounded by more than 50 family members, all descended from or connected to her and Fletcher. When Grace's time finally came, it was peaceful. She was 85 years old, lying in the bed she had shared with Fletcher for so many years. Her children were there, holding her hands, telling her it was all right to let go. "Papa is waiting for you," Emily said softly. "He has been waiting all these years." Grace smiled, her eyes already seeing beyond this world. "I am coming, Fletcher," she whispered. "I am coming home to you." She closed her eyes and breathed her last, a smile on her face. The children wept, but also smiled, knowing their parents were together again. Grace was buried next to Fletcher under the oak tree. Her headstone matched his in style. Grace Eleanor Bryant, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, a woman who turned rejection into legacy. The Bryant Ranch continued to thrive for generations. The story that Fletcher and Grace had written together became a family treasure, passed down through the years, read at weddings and special occasions. New generations learned about the mail-order bride who was refused in the snow, and the cowboy who said, "Then you are mine," starting a love story that would echo through time. Years later, one of the great-great-grandchildren, a young woman preparing for her own wedding, read the manuscript and was moved to tears. "This is the most beautiful love story I have ever heard," she told her grandmother, who was Tommy's daughter. They found each other against all odds and built something amazing. They did, her grandmother agreed. And the best part is, it is all true, every word of it. That is the legacy they left us. Not just the ranch or the money or the land, but the knowledge that real love exists. That two people who start as strangers can build a life together that matters. That rejection and heartbreak can lead to the greatest blessings if we are brave enough to stay open to possibility. The young woman hugged the manuscript to her chest. "I want a love like that. Like what great-great-grandma Grace and great-great-grandpa Fletcher had. Then be brave like they were. Be honest and hardworking and true to your commitments. Choose kindness over pride, partnership over romance, substance over style. That is what they did, and look at what it created." The wedding took place at the ranch, under the oak tree where Fletcher and Grace rested. The ceremony included a reading from their manuscript, the part where Fletcher told Grace she was his now and promised to take care of her. There was not a dry eye present. After the wedding, the young bride and groom walked up to the graves to pay their respects. They stood hand in hand, looking at the simple headstones, and made a private vow to honor the legacy of love that had started it all. The wind rustled through the oak leaves, warm and gentle, almost like a blessing from beyond. The ranch spread out below, beautiful and prosperous, filled with the descendants of a mail-order bride refused in the snow and the cowboy who had claimed her as his own. Their love story had ended the way all love stories must, with death parting them for a time. But it had also been given the greatest gift any love story could receive. It had become immortal, living on in the hearts and lives of everyone who came after. Fletcher and Grace Bryant had taken a moment of rejection and transformed it into a legacy of love that would never die. And somewhere beyond this world, two souls who had found each other against all odds were together again, their love eternal, their story complete. From rejection in the snow to forever in eternity, their journey had come full circle. The mail-order bride had found her home. The lonely cowboy had found his partner. And together, they had built something that would outlast them both, a testament to the power of faith, courage, and enduring love. The ranch would continue, generation after generation, built on the foundation they had laid. Children would be born in the house they had made a home. Couples would fall in love walking the same paths Fletcher and Grace had walked. And through it all, their story would be told and retold, a reminder that sometimes the worst moments of our lives are actually the first steps toward our greatest blessings. In San Pedro, California, where it all began, a historical marker was eventually placed near where the old general store once stood. It told the brief version of the story, of Samuel Whitmore's rejection, of Fletcher Bryant's declaration, of the love that followed. Tourists would stop to rate it, moved by the romance of it all. Locals would smile, knowing the fuller story, understanding that real love was not about grand gestures or perfect circumstances, but about two people choosing each other every day, through good times and bad, until death parted them and eternity reunited them. The story of Fletcher and Grace Bryant became a part of California history, a favorite tale of Old West romance. Books were written about them, though none captured the truth quite as well as their own manuscript. Historians studied the ranch records, marveling at what they had built together. Romantics made pilgrimages to see where it all happened, hoping to capture some of that magic for themselves. But for the family, the descendants who carried their blood and their legacy, the story was simply the foundation of everything they knew. It was the proof that love could triumph over circumstance, that strangers could become soulmates, that a moment of rejection could lead to a lifetime of joy. And so the story ends where it began, with love. Not the easy love of fairy tales, but the hard one, deeply earned love of two people who took a chance on each other and never looked back. Fletcher and Grace Bryant lived, loved, built a legacy, and died knowing they had created something beautiful together. Their story was complete, their love eternal, their legacy assured. In the end, that is all any of us can hope for. To love and be loved, to build something meaningful, to leave the world better than we found it. Fletcher and Grace did all of that and more. They turned a snowy December rejection into a golden legacy that would last forever. They proved that sometimes the best things in life come from the worst moments. And they showed everyone who knew their story that real love, true love, lasting love is possible if we are brave enough to claim it when it appears, even in the most unexpected circumstances. The mail-order bride refused in the snow found her happily ever after. The cowboy who claimed her as his own kept his promise. Together, they wrote a love story for the ages, one that would be remembered and celebrated long after they were gone. And in the hearts of everyone who heard their tale, the same hope flickered to life. That maybe, just maybe, love like that still exists in the world, waiting to be found by those brave enough to seek it. Their story was complete. Their love was eternal. Their legacy lived on. And somewhere beyond the veil of this world, Fletcher and Grace Bryant walked hand in hand through eternity, their love as strong as the day they first met in the snow, their commitment as solid as the ranch they had built together, their hearts forever joined in the greatest love story the Wild West had ever known.